we know who you are, but tell our audience who you are and what do you do, sir?
Okay, why don't we start it's not recording yet,
Now we're
right?
recording.
No, we're just we can record wherever we want, but
Oh,
we're just
okay.
we were gonna let you know when the episodes start. We didn't want to. We're not gonna have you checking out Jane Goodall or anything. We'll start after that.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, let's start. Go ahead.
All right. I am so excited about our guest today. I can throw a bunch of superlatives at him, but I think it's better if he explains who he is himself. Professor Loeb, tell our bros, our demo, who you are and what you do, sir.
Yeah, so I was born on a farm and was very curious as a kid, and I haven't changed since then. So I would say that's my defining quality. And I was asked in a recent podcast, how do I want to be remembered? And my answer is by the work that I will do in the future. I'm not so proud of everything I've done so far, but I think the beauty of life is that you can grow and get better over time. And for me, it's really, I would love to live forever, by the way. Let's start from that. I would love to be immortal. You might say that's too ambitious, pretentious, and so forth, but there is an animal that we know about which appears to be immortal as far as we know. It's called the planarian. And there was an experimentalist that cut the planarian about a century ago into 279 pieces. And each piece developed new organs and became a planarian, a full planarian. So
Wow.
if you cut the head of this animal, it develops a new head and it has some memory. And I immediately thought of Marie Antoinette that was put on the guillotine during the French Revolution because the rebels would have liked her to lose her head, but if they would cut her head and she was a planarian, she would develop the head would develop a new body and the body would develop a new head. They would get two queens for the price of one. And they wouldn't accomplish their goal. But my point is, a planarian could be an amazing astronaut for interstellar travel because the travel could take 1 billion years. I mean, that's what it would take Voyager, the spacecraft that we launched out of the solar system, to reach the opposite side of the Milky Way galaxy, away from the sun. And a billion year would require a lot of generations of humans or any other animal, but a planarian can live that long. I mean, they emerged on Earth around 400 million years ago, and as far as we know, some of them might be still alive from that time. So there is a proof of concept. And for me, the main reason I want to live forever is so that I can answer a lot of questions I have about the reality that we all share. Our knowledge is just an island in an ocean of
Before
ignorance.
show, I
Right.
just want to interrupt you just for a second, Professor Loeb. Before Sean starts, obviously you guys can tell he's not just a farmer. I've never heard a farmer go off on biology like that. He is the Frank B. Bard Jr. Professor of Science, Director and Institute for Theory and Computation at Harvard University, without a doubt, the smartest person that we've had on this podcast, I believe. And hey, look, just going to say the smartest person I've had on any podcast. And yes, I did a pro wrestling podcast before this for the Bars of Low,
Well,
but still.
I love sports. I jog every morning at sunrise, and I think it's really important for, a lot of people take psychedelics or other drugs just to improve their cognitive abilities. I think the best you can do is actually do sports and eat well and sleep well. That's really the key. That's because our bodies developed over a few million years this way. That's what we used to do. And so, yeah, I enjoy being in nature.
Yeah.
That is really because I grew up on a farm and I'm really connected to nature. I don't have any footprint on social media. I don't care how many likes I get. And in terms of intelligence, I really think that we deserve some dose of modesty because we tend to think that we are at the top of the food chain. I was at a restaurant yesterday. I looked at the menu, and it's all about animals that we think are less intelligent than we are. But the question is, are we really at the top of the food chain? There could be extraterrestrials out there that outsmart us, and then if we ever meet them, they would put us in their soup.
Well, I'll tell you, your love for life and for nature comes out in your work a lot. Because I just read your latest article about finding biological signatures in the moon of Europa, and what you're looking for is in my layman brain, lipids and fatty acids that would show biological material. And it would kind of prove the existence of microbial life, which really, really opens up a big, wide array of what you're talking about, as far as the food chain goes, as far as nature goes, as far as understanding of our reality, like you said about the island. The island gets bigger. The island gets bigger the minute that happens.
And it's also very important because the mainstream of the scientific community that thinks about life beyond Earth, they talk about the habitable zone. This is the region around stars where you can have liquid water on the surface of a rock.
Is that also Goldilocks? The Goldilocks zone? Is it the same thing?
Yeah, yes, okay. Exactly. So that's the conventional thinking, and then the mainstream of the astronomy community is decided as its chief priority to invest more than $10 billion so that within a couple of decades we'll build an observatory in space called the Habitable World Observatory. By habitable, what it means is we will look for rocks like the Earth in the habitable zone of other stars, so they can get warmed up just to the right level where water will not freeze. It will not be in solid ice state, but will be liquid. And then you can look for chemistry of life as we know it, and study the atmospheres of those planets at the cost of more than $10 billion. Now imagine that we find
drop of the bucket
life under the ice of Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter, or Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn. If we find life under the ice, by the way, in the case of Europa, the ice is about 20 kilometers thick, so it's really thick. But then under it, we believe that there is an ocean, liquid water ocean, because we see plumes coming out of the cracks in the ice. That is much more apparent in Enceladus. And then you can imagine, flying through those plumes, which are basically geysers, just like in national parks, you see these geysers.
Old Faithful.
The heating of those moons is done by tide. The tide on Europa is 1,000 times bigger than the tide on Earth by the moon, and so it's huge, and that's why there are cracks in the ice, and some water vapor comes out of those cracks. Now we can study, like, imagine if there are microbes in the oceans under the ice, and they would come out spewed out in the form of snow, out of these geysers, and we can look for that, and maybe we will find parts of fish. Just imagine dead fish on the surface of Europa or Enceladus. We've never gone there, and there are 2 missions planning to go to Europa. But if we find life there, then it would expand the prospects for life in many other places than the habitable zone, because you can have a very cold region where you have an object with a shell of ice under which you have liquid water ocean, and that there are many more objects like that far away from stars than planets in the habitable zone of stars. That will change altogether the way we think about life. And moreover, the next question, the follow-up question is it life as we know it? If we find such life, is it made of the same building blocks that life on Earth is made of, in terms of the genetics, the DNA? We all came from the same common ancestor on Earth, all life forms, starting with microbes all the way to humans. We all have a common ancestor that arrived at Earth 4.2 billion years ago. When the Earth was only a few million years old, a few hundred of millions of years old, just when the Earth cooled from the initial formation process. As soon as it cooled, life started on Earth, and it all came from a common ancestor. And the question is whether life elsewhere is the same. There is another object called Titan, which is a moon of Saturn, and Titan has liquid oceans and rivers and lakes, not of water on the surface. It's the only other body that has liquid on the surface. It's methane and ethane. And I would love to go there fishing to check if there is any fish there.
Well, really quickly, because another thing you speak about in that same article, I believe, is the idea of this microbial life being within the moon of Europa. It opens things up. You talk about I think the word hierarchy comes up, and so in your assessment, would you say that? The minute that this is proven scientifically that the microbial life is in these oceans or in these plumes, what ends up happening is our evolution chart goes from being stuck to our planet to just universal. So the same way you have that doesn't mean, like you said, as far as hey, we're top of the food chain, doesn't mean you have things that are above us on that evolution chart that are way beyond.
In fact, just a few hours ago, I received a set of questions from a reporter in Croatia that I replied to, and I wrote about it in my latest essay just from an hour ago on medium.com. You can check every couple of days I write there. And the question was, what would be the implications of finding life? And I said, it really depends on the form of life that you find. If you find microbial life, it would be of immense scientific importance because, as we discussed, it will mean that life is everywhere, probably, wherever you have warm water, if we find it in those places. And then if we find, for example, technological gadgets near Earth that were manufactured by advanced alien civilizations, that would imply that perhaps we're not the smartest kid on the block.
And that involves the Dyson sphere, correct? That they hypothesize.
Well, they don't need to be. Look, if you just read the news every day, you realize that there is a lot of room for improvement, and
Sure.
we are not the pinnacle of creation. So I think it's not difficult to imagine scenarios where things that are smarter than us, or maybe simply more advanced than us, they had more time to develop science and technology than we did. We had only 1 century, since quantum mechanics was discovered. It was exactly a century ago, and now we're building chips for AI systems that are at the atomic scale, on the scale of atoms based on that quantum mechanics principles that we discovered. But imagine maintaining science and technology for another millennium or maybe 1,000,000 years or 1,000,000,000 years. Who knows where we would get? And they might have the benefit of time. I always give the example of Moses that was extremely impressed in the Old Testament, when he witnessed a bush that was burning without being consumed. That's not, if we were to show Moses a cell phone from today, he would have been much more impressed.
Sure.
And moreover, the cell phone would have a GPS app that would help him save 40 years of navigating towards the promised land unsuccessfully. He would have gotten to the promised land within a few weeks. So
honestly, I think you just described a great GPS commercial.
That's the new T-Mobile ad campaign.
Yeah.
And Moses would have said, "Oh, this cell phone must be evidence for a superhuman intelligence," but it's not superhuman. We are just humans like him, except we have the benefit of science and technology. That's all. And so I would say that, we could be filled with religious awe if we find another, a gadget from a more advanced civilization. And religious leaders, will need to adapt to the idea that God may not be a parent of only a single child. Okay, we have siblings. So we might feel jealous that our siblings, they are far more advanced and they have better science and technology. They perhaps appear smarter than us. It's just like the jealousy among siblings, but we have to adapt to that. And we will be filled with a sense of modesty that we desperately need.
So some species are going to impress God, and others, like ours, are just going to keep asking it for money. But I do want to ask, because you had sent to, and then Sean, back to you. But you had mentioned, civilizations, superior to ours, creating different technology, and it seems like a perfect transition to Oumuamua. And why does it make me hungry? If people don't know what Professor Loeb's going to explain what Oumuamua is. I just read a book about it. I mean, first off, am I pronouncing this right? Because I feel like.
Pretty close. It's
All right, good.
I mean, the name Oumuamua means scout in the Hawaiian language, and this is just an object discovered in 2017, October 19, 2017, by a survey telescope in Hawaii that was built with the purpose of finding near-Earth objects, because we know about the dinosaurs being killed by, an asteroid the size of Manhattan Island, and we say, oh, we are smarter than dinosaurs. We are looking up, and we can figure out if an object is approaching us. So there is, there was this observatory constructed to find most of the near-Earth objects that are bigger than a football field. And they haven't found most of them. So now there is a new observatory that will start operations next month, actually, in Chile. And it's called the Rubin Observatory, that would do much better. That one, the second one, the new one, is employing a camera with 3.2 gigapixels, about 1,000 times more than your cell phone camera. But at any event, so this telescope in Hawaii that was called the Pan-STARRS a decade ago started surveying the sky for near-Earth objects, and suddenly in 2017 they noticed an object that is near Earth, so they immediately looked at it, and they realized that it's moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun. So they said, oh, that's the first reported interstellar object. And they called it Oumuamua, and everyone thought, oh, it must be a comet from another star. But there was no cometary tail. There was no evaporation from this object, no gas or dust around it. And then, so they said, oh, maybe it's a rock that doesn't have any ice on the surface, that is not getting evaporation from the surface by getting closer to the sun. And so it's an asteroid. It's just a rock. But then this object was really strange, because the amount of sunlight reflected from it was changing by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling every 8 hours. And the best fit to the variation of brightness was that of a flat object, a pancake-like. And then it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force that we couldn't figure out, because there was no evaporation, so it couldn't benefit from the rocket effect. And I suggested that it's just a reflection of sunlight that pushes it. Indeed, a few years later, there was another object discovered. It was given the name 2020 SO, and that one was definitely pushed by reflecting sunlight. And then a few weeks later, the discoverers on the same telescope in Hawaii realized that this was a rocket booster from a 1966 launch by NASA.
Oh, wow.
So here you have it, a technological object that we know is technological because we produced it. And the question is, who produced Oumuamua? And I should say, after that discovery and the anomalies of Oumuamua, I started getting really excited about the possibility that we might find space trash or functional devices from another civilization. And around 2019, there was a report from the Director of National Intelligence to the US Congress about unidentified objects. And so as a result of the first report, I decided to establish the Galileo project that is focusing on technological objects near Earth that might be of extraterrestrial origin. And we are now building altogether 3 observatories to look for those. And I also went on an expedition to the Pacific Ocean to search for the materials of an interstellar meteor that we discovered with my former student. And I went there, and it was filmed by Netflix. So hopefully within less than a year, the Netflix documentary will come out.
Great.
I should also mention that on January 2nd this year, 2025, there was an object that came close to Earth, and it was reported by an amateur astronomer and as an asteroid. And then within less than a day, the astronomers realized, oh, that one is moving exactly along the path of the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX in 2018 as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy. And so they said, oh, it's not a rock, it's actually a car. We know that about objects that we launched, but we don't know what other civilizations may have launched.
Which proves our capabilities. And I think I remember when the Oumuamua first came out. They one of the theories was the way it powered itself into our solar system and then it used our gravitational pull to get itself around the planet. Correct? Like because they wasn't propelling itself, but it could have been some technology where it knew how to use what was already going on to power itself. Correct?
Well, yeah, we don't know the nature of this object. We know that it was anomalous. And my colleagues, as is often done, in science, you often hear the phrase that there is nothing really new. And part of the problem is that whenever there is something new, the experts are brushing it under the carpet and saying, oh, no, it's... So in the case of Oumuamua, the claim is, oh, it's a dark comet. It's a comet that had a cometary tail, but we couldn't see it.
Right.
Which, it's just like the adults in the room telling the kid in Hans Christian Andersen's tale that, the emperor has clothes.
Yeah.
You just can't see them.
Yes.
And so that's what they're saying. They're saying it's a dark comet. But I just say, look, we have no evidence for it being a comet. Why would you call it a dark comet? Leave it as an anomalous object and let's get more data on the next object that looks like it, which we may find with the Rubin Observatory.
Yes. Professor Loeb, I do want to, kind of in that spirit, but, when I watch, when I've seen the footage of you in documentaries and Project Galileo, it's, you have a scientific method I can get behind. And if I'm, if I'm trusting someone to do this research, I'm trusting you. I guess my question is right now with Skywatcher, is there... how can I? Is there a danger of these guys who have less of a scientific background than you do, accidentally, ripping a fabric in our reality? because they're, I mean, like these guys are just
connecting a lot of dots there, Dan.
With AK-47s. It's a little bit different than a normal, like a Harvard study. It seems more like, it seems a little how I would do science, and that makes me scared, Professor Loeb.
Oh, don't be scared, because just think about, if you were to walk down the street and you see an ant that behaves in a crazy fashion, you wouldn't be threatened by it. You would just ignore it. If there are functional devices that were made by a more intelligent species, they are not troubled by us. Maybe they're not even interested in us. Maybe they have their own agenda. I wouldn't worry about it. We tend to think that it's all about us, that if they come and visit, it's about humans. Humans came to exist only a few million years ago. That's less than a tenth of a percent of the age of the Earth. It's really a small fraction of the history of Earth, and the journey must have started a long time before that. So if they embarked on a trip towards Earth, it was for a different reason, and I don't think we play an important role. We arrived late to the stage. We are not at the center of stage. I mean here the cosmic stage. We know that we are not at the center of the universe, despite what the Church, the Vatican, was arguing for a long time. So if you arrive to a play and you're not at the center of stage, the play is not about you. I mean, this is really very simple logic. And we tend to always think that it's about us.
Yeah. I feel another theme that runs through, just based off the articles I was reading, and just even Oumuamua, what you're looking for is signature. A signature seems to be very important to you. A signature that there's something else. And one of the articles that stood out to me was the one about would we be able to detect a nuclear war on an exoplanet nearby? And it's so interesting to me because I think back to it makes connections with Roswell to me and the nuclear testing that was going on in New Mexico. And one of the theories about, in the UFO world is the reason these things showed up is the nuclear testing was going on and they were like, hey, they've mastered this type of thing. It's like the ant with a gun theory. Like you were just saying, hey, you would ignore an ant until they have nuclear bombs maybe. But one of the things you were saying, and I'm guessing in the article, I think you're describing being a vast distance away from these exoplanets, obviously. But one of the one of the things that struck me so interesting is that the article kind of surmises that it would really take a lot of nuclear energy for us to go, holy cow, look, what is that? What is going on there? Even the luminosity that's created from these explosions doesn't only kind of shows up for X amount of time, and it'd be a one, like you were saying, it's a one in however many chance that we'd see it. So I guess
I was inspired by the book that Annie Jacobson wrote about a scenario for a nuclear holocaust.
I read that. It kept me up for a week.
Okay, so as much as it
is not a fun read. It's the opposite of a beach read, guys.
Yeah, as much as you might be impressed. The idea is that North Korea launched a ballistic missile towards Washington D.C. and then a nuclear ballistic missile, and then they have another one towards California from a submarine, and then the U.S. responds, but the Russians misinterpret the response of the U.S. and they launch about 900 warheads towards the U.S. At which point the U.S. and NATO respond with full capacity to those. But in that scenario, at most you get maybe a few thousand megaton of TNT, equivalent amount of energy released within a few hours. And I calculated, that this amounts to about 1% of the energy that is falling on the day side of Earth. So at most, you're changing the brightness of the planet that is looked at from a distance by about 1%,
which is negligible,
which is really a small change and not easy to identify from a distance because the planet is next to a bright star, like the sun, for example.
Right.
So it would take us a lot of effort to notice that. And I'm willing to bet that if astronomers notice a flare from a planet after a lot of work, they would say, well, maybe it's just a magnetic flare in the magnetosphere, a reconnection flare as a result of the stellar wind interacting with the planet. It's nothing really significant. So just think about it. The most devastating scenario that Annie Jacobson came up with is barely noticeable with our very best instruments, or maybe in the foreseeable future, for astronomers, and they would dismiss it because you can accommodate that with a little extra energy from a flare on the star, for example. It's not very significant from a distance, and and also, why would they come here to save us? It's again us thinking about it.
Right.
I have two daughters, and when they were young, they always thought that the world is about them. Because we cared about them and the parents, and they stayed at home. But they had a psychological shock going to the kindergarten because they realized that the many kids like them, their situation is not special. The world has a lot of other things happening aside from what happens to them. This is called maturing, to getting the perspective about life. And as a civilization, I would argue that we haven't matured yet, because even though we realize we're not at the center of the universe, and even the Vatican admitted that in 1992, 2 decades after humans reached the moon, even though we admit that, we still, even when you ask astrobiologists, the mainstream of astronomy, they would tell you that it's an extraordinary claim to imagine something like us near another star. And I say, why do you say that? Why are we so presumptuous? And it's just human nature, just like my daughters. We keep thinking, oh, it's all about us. We are important. There is nothing bigger than us. We are at the top of the food chain.
Yeah, which just by a pretty easy path can be disproven very easily, just by what you're saying. Because even what we were just talking about, this article, in order for, like, you're making the assumption that another civilization, like you were saying before, they had the benefit of time. They had a benefit of another 100,000 years.
Exactly.
And they'd have to develop the instruments in order to be like, we know that little change in light is what it is. You have to have such an understanding of interplanetary science in order to go and visit these.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the vast space and time is measured in billions of years. So we are impatient. When Enrico Fermi sat in Los Alamos for lunch in 1950 and asked his colleagues, "Where is everybody?" This is very presumptuous. He was not building a telescope to search for anyone, and he was asking, "Where are the extraterrestrials?" That's completely inappropriate. Why would they show up at lunch in Los Alamos in 1950? That's a particular time out of billions of years, like they may have visited a million years ago, and he was not around, Enrico. And, he's asking a question that any lonely person asks. And what you tell a lonely person is, don't be so presumptuous. Your partner will not come and sit next to you. You are not that attractive. And you need to go to dating sites. And only then you can, after putting some effort, you might find something.
So if Fermi had Bumble, he wouldn't have the Fermi paradox.
I think, Avi, I think you should be the new host of Pop the Balloon. I think it would be amazing.
By the way, my wife...
it's interesting because...
Yeah,
I wanted to do something with you because, like, so many times the craziest conspiracy theories, we bring on somebody, they got hair, they kind of look like me, but even worse hair, I wanted to, I'm going to list off some theories, and I don't want you to say if they're true or false. I want you to say on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being the least possible, 10 being, oh, this is impossible. So basically what I'm saying is, guys, Avi isn't endorsing any of these theories, but if you had to just do a conjecture, because it'll give people more of an idea of, like you and Gary Nolan, you are the guys people trust, Okay. Number
ahead.
1, there is a multiverse, a real one Marvel isn't losing money on.
I would say probably 0.
Seriously?
Really?
Yeah. Because, the whole idea of the multiverse, let me just explain. The idea is that anything that can happen will happen an infinite number of times because, we can see a small region around us that light traveled during after the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, over the past 13.8 billion years, light traveled a certain distance. We can't see beyond that because the Big Bang, it does not allow us. So, the claim is, there are many, space extends much beyond that. And there is the so-called multiverse where anything that can happen will happen an infinite number of times, meaning that you should never take responsibility for your actions. Like if you have an overdraft in the bank, don't worry about it. There is a copy of you where you are a billionaire. And if you do something really bad, you get a D or an F in an exam, don't worry about it. There are many, there is an infinite number of copies of you that are doing much better. And I think that's not a good idea. It's just like being high on drugs or actually, putting goggles of the metaverse on your head, or it takes away your responsibility. And that's not, that's not good practice. We've seen recently what happens when you are not responsible. You start making statement, not me, but someone else started making demeaning statements about the president of the United States, and later he pulled out these tweets, and that was an irresponsible act because the Tesla stock went down, and it was not good on all counts. Like what is the benefit from behaving this way? So not being responsible has consequences that are not good for you. That's my point. You can eat as much sugar as you want. You will feel high at the time, but it's not good for you in the long term.
I disagree, but I disagree, Mr. Harvard. All right. Second one.
Okay, so just to summarize, I think the multiverse is junk food that may feel good when you eat it. Yeah. But it's not good for your long-term mental health.
Okay. I love that. I really love that answer. Wow.
I love that. Okay, well, this one is going to get a 0 for sure. But we are the only intelligent life in the universe.
0.
Okay, this is it'd be interesting to see where you land on this. There was once a living civilization on Mars. 0 to 10.
Oh, I would give it a 5, actually. Yeah. I would like to go to the caves on the surface of Mars and look through on the walls if there are any prehistoric paintings there. We've never done that. You can do it with a helicopter like the one Ingenuity that was launched by NASA. You can just bring it with a video camera into the caves and check them out. We've never tried.
You ever wonder why? Are they a little bit afraid of what they might find? Do you think, or
Well, I'm really quite disappointed that that NASA didn't really explore the possibility of life in a much more straightforward way, because Viking, gave us hints that there might be life, and in fact, the principal investigator of Viking claimed that he thinks they found some evidence for life. But you could imagine taking some soil with the latest rover that went there, the Perseverance rover, taking some soil and putting a drop of water in it and seeing if anything comes out, or giving it some nutrition and seeing if anything comes alive. We just didn't do that. And you may ask yourself, why is NASA not doing it? Like, why don't they do the obvious thing, which you want, like bringing a microscope and just looking at the soil if there are any microbes, like doing simple things? And the answer is they're afraid of their shadow. They basically are trying to be as careful as possible without doing the right thing.
it's like your cold comet, your dark comet comment from before, where hey, it's got to be this because it can't possibly be this out of the box theory. Yeah,
but that inhibits innovation. It inhibits the progress. I mean, being wrong is okay. You can be wrong. I mean, Einstein was wrong 3 times. He argued that black holes don't exist, gravitational waves don't exist, and quantum mechanics doesn't have spooky action at a distance. And all 3 statements ended up being wrong, and the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded 3 times over the past decade to people who disproved him. So there is nothing bad about being wrong. What the worst you can do in scientific inquiry is basically suppress the evidence or not be curious. And that's a crime that is being made by a lot of mainstream scientists. They are not curious, or they pretend to know the answer in advance without seeking evidence.
Really quick, before Dan, you keep going, a quick question, because you made me think of this. That mentality, do you think eventually, with the more data it collects, James Webb's going to make them have to eat crow a little bit and go, we're changing our thinking and changing our pathways?
Yeah, I get hope from the story of the Vatican that in 1992 said that Galileo was right. Why did they do that? It's a politically,
there's theories on that too.
A damaging move for them, because politically speaking, they insisted until then that the Earth is at the center of the universe. The reason they did that is because it looked foolish for them to insist. And why was it foolish? Because there is so much evidence that any person with common sense would say, oh, well, what are they talking about, that the Earth is at the center? We can see images of the Earth moving around the sun from some spacecraft. So at that point, they agreed. So for me, the biggest pleasure I can get is to be flooded with data so that the experts, quote unquote, will not shove it under the carpet. And because when you have so much data that it becomes obvious that there is something that doesn't look like a rock that came near the Earth from another star, at that point, it would be foolish of anyone to argue otherwise, because the evidence would be clear. Now, the only situation where people can still ignore it is if the evidence is not clear and they say it's not worth checking, it's not worth taking better data, it's not worth thinking about alternatives. That's the situation when the data is incomplete. And I just want to be flooded with data. That will give me, even if it turns out that everything is rocks from other stars, we learn something new. Okay, so we move on.
Is there a possibility?
Montana piles of data in front of us.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Sean.
I was just going to say, is it possible, when we mentioned Vatican, that the other reason for being so secretive is because the minute that you admit that we're not the center of the universe, the divine stops being divine, and we're just another place in the vast universe, instead of it being what their whole brand basically suffers from.
No, actually, so there were members of a religious organization called Christianity Today that came to Harvard. And they asked me what would be the implications of finding extraterrestrials for their religious belief.
Right.
And I said, look, I have 2 daughters. And when the second one was born, it didn't take away any of my love to the first one. So thinking that God can attend to only one civilization is very demeaning. It's limiting.
Right.
And they agreed. They were happy with his answers. So they are not feeling a threat, to their religious belief from an extraterrestrial civilization.
Interesting.
Well, this is something both Sean and I have heard a lot, and it's not said a lot. It's been said a lot on more of the conspiratorial podcasts, but we've heard this from people that are, in defense contracting positions, and some people that are a little bit more of the know than me and Sean. Something is coming into Earth's orbit in 2027 that's the size of a planet and may be intelligently controlled. Avi's already laughing, guys, not to bury the lead, but
Well, I will explain
at 10.
why. Because we can see a planet from a great distance. Now, unless, even if it's moving, I guess if it's moving at the speed of light, then it should be now about 2 light years away. It would be, 2 light years away means that it's entering the solar system now, the Oort cloud, the outskirts of the solar system. Soon enough, within a year or a year and a half, we should be able to start seeing it. We will see it in advance of its arrival, unless it's really moving at the speed of light. And usually all the objects are not moving that fast. So my point is, we should be able to see it. If it's moving at much less than the speed of light, let's say at a typical speed that the stars move, which is a 0.1% of the speed of light, or even less than that. At that speed, it should be now very close to us, and we would have seen it by surveying the sky. It cannot be a planet moving, at a typical speed that you find objects in the interstellar medium, so close to us that within 2 years it will approach us, because we would have seen it from the reflection of sunlight. Planets that are so close, that are within 100 times the Earth-Sun separation. We see planets like that. We see even Pluto, that is farther. So I would argue that it cannot be a planet that moves at a typical speed. Only if it moves at close to the speed of light, and that would require something really unusual. At any event, I hope to live until 2027 and beyond, and I would love to be surprised. That's what makes life worth living, being surprised.
So it sounds like you're at a 0.2 on that.
Yeah, but pretty close to zero.
You're at a 10% of the speed of light.
0.0001.
Yeah. However, an object much smaller than a planet, I think, is very possible, that even before 2027 we might see with the Rubin Observatory.
Well, you actually speak about there's another article you wrote that I was trying to understand. I was trying to get my head wrapped around it, because I'm not in this world enough. But you were talking about the amount of matter that could be shoveled into a observable universe. When you were talking about that, and the takeaway I got from that article was, when you compared the math, you were comparing the math to Earth-based things and to universe-based things, and I think one of the points of the article was that patterns emerge. Is that correct? Would you say in the amounts of the weights of, like you were talking about the weight of dark matter, which I was trying to figure that one out, and all sorts of things, but it seems like you're like it's very comparable to the amounts of the weights of things on Earth, which might be by design. Is that what you were trying to say?
Well, so first, let me explain. So most of the matter, we don't know much. I mean, we know quantitatively how much matter there is in the universe, but we don't know what it's made of. 85% of it is called dark matter. We can't see it. We don't know what it is. That's 85% of the matter, but the matter itself is just about 30% of the mass budget of the universe. There is also dark energy in addition to dark matter that we don't know what it is, and so we are pretty much in the dark, as to what the universe is made of. If we were to take a shovel and go through the universe along a line, the amount of matter that you would collect all the way to the farthest galaxy that the Webb telescope saw, which is, when the universe was only a few percent of its current age. That's when that galaxy existed. So if we go along a line to that galaxy, the amount of mass that you would collect per unit area would be similar to the mass per unit area of a thumb, just a thumb. That's all. Because the universe is so rarefied. The mean density of matter in the universe is 10 to the power 30, smaller than the density of liquid water. Like it's completely negligible. You have one atom per cubic meter or so in the universe. It's really rarefied because it expanded so much. As we go back in time, it was denser, but what I'm saying is that that's what allows us to look through the universe because it's transparent. If it was much denser, we wouldn't be able to see that very distant galaxy, when the first stars and formed in the universe. By the way, one of my main areas of research that I pioneered was the first stars and galaxies in the universe. It's sort of the scientific version of the story of Genesis. And I wrote 2 textbooks about that, and I published hundreds of papers on that. So this is one of my early interests. And only Oumuamua changed my sort of emphasis on searching for intelligent civilizations, because before that I worked on black holes, I worked on the first stars.
So wow, okay, I never realized the fact of you say you're saying 1 atom per cubic meter. That's the
Roughly, yeah, roughly that, like 1 atom per the volume of your body, roughly speaking, in the universe on average today. And then if you go back in time, of course, since it's expanding, it was much denser. If you go far enough back in time, when the universe was less than 400,000 years old, back then it was opaque. You couldn't see through it.
Yeah.
So, around us, as we look farther and farther, we get to earlier times in the universe because it took light a long time to reach us from large distances. And so we will hit a sort of a dense fog once we reach the epoch, the time when the universe was 400,000 years old. Beyond that, we can't look through our telescopes to find what happened in the universe before that. But gladly, we are receiving radiation from that time. It's called the cosmic microwave background. Do you know about the story about how it was discovered? It's really amazing because I wrote an essay about innovation in science and how can we foster it now, given all the things I talked about, that people don't take risks, they don't. And so one thing I remember, that makes me inspired is the story of Bell Labs, that brought together the best minds to their corridor, and they made a lot of discoveries out of practical applications. They made discoveries in fundamental physics. So one of them was around 1964 or so, when they developed an antenna for communication. So they wanted to transmit microwaves and reflect them off a mylar balloon in the atmosphere and then receive the signal. That was the idea. And so they developed a big antenna, a horn antenna, to detect the signal. And they hired 2 astronomers that would check the noise in the antenna. And so these astronomers pointed the antenna at a very quiet region of the sky of the Milky Way galaxy, and they were detecting some noise, sort of like the white noise that you see on the old television screens.
The snow on the TV, yeah.
Yeah. So they noticed this noise and they said, okay, maybe we can get rid of it. So first they checked for some pigeon poop that was on the antenna. They thought maybe it produces the noise. Then they thought maybe it's coming from Earth. But so they looked at in different directions. They saw the same noise. And then they wrote a scientific paper saying we detected some noise. And a professor from MIT named Bernie Burke, he realized that in fact it may not be noise, because he heard a group at Princeton University trying to detect, building an instrument to detect the relic radiation from the Big Bang. And the calculations indicated at Princeton that it should be in microwaves, the radiation. And they started building the experiment. And the person in charge of the team over there, Bob Dickey, knew Bernie Burke. So Bernie called him and said, look, I think the signal you're seeking was just detected by Bell Labs, the Penzias and Wilson. And Bob hung out the phone and said to his team, we were scooped. And of course, the Nobel Prize was awarded. This is the most important scientific discovery in the context of the universe, because it indicates that the universe started from a hot, dense, early phase.
Lends credence.
It validated the Big Bang model of the universe.
So the sound, Dan, that they were hearing was the universe expanding. That's like that.
That
nobody knew what.
No, it was the radiation that came from the early hot phase of the universe, propagating through the. And so they just detected it by chance. So what is the moral of the story? That even if you have some practical application in mind, in the case of Bell Labs, it was developing an antenna for communication. You can make a fundamental discovery in science, and so then we have to learn from that, because science needs to be, I think, aligned with the interests of the public. We can develop science that would be useful for society, but while doing so, while being in contact with reality, we can discover new things. And we should learn a lesson from the way Bell Labs was managed.
Speaking of scoops, can you give us any new information on the materials you guys are working the underwater asteroid that you're working on?
So we went to the Pacific Ocean in search for the materials from an interstellar meteor, an object roughly 0.5 meter in size, much smaller than Oumuamua, which was the size of a football field. But this object collided with Earth, in difference from Oumuamua, and it burned up in a big fireball that released about 1% of the Hiroshima atomic bomb energy. And it was detected by US government satellites that are orbiting the Earth and looking for ballistic missiles, And so there was a report about this object that was cataloged by NASA in 2014. And since then, nobody checked the properties of this fireball. And we realized that it represents an object that was moving faster than the escape speed from the solar system. So it's the first recognized interstellar meteor. And the US Space Command confirmed our identification. They wrote a letter to NASA saying that this is interstellar in origin at the 99.99% confidence. And so I decided to lead an expedition and search for the materials in the crash site. And we put a sled on the ocean floor that was about 1 mile deep. And we went back 26 times, back and forth, like mowing the lawn. And we ended up finding some tiny spherules, molten droplets, meteoritic material that I brought back to Harvard and gave it to my colleague, Stein Jacobson. And he analyzed it. And we found that about 10% of the material appears to be with a very unusual chemical composition. And what we are doing right now, I mean, it was unusual because some elements like beryllium, lanthanum, uranium were 1,000 times more abundant than in the materials that made the solar system. And what we are doing right now is looking for rare isotopes like neodymium or strontium and checking whether we can demonstrate beyond any doubt that those isotopes have an abundance different from solar system materials. That's what we are doing, and my hope is that in the coming months we will have an answer. And I should say, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a news report that some group analyzed a meteoroid that appears to belong to about 0.2% of the population of meteorites that are in collections, and they appear to be anomalous. So this meteorite was actually made of materials that could have come from a planet like Mercury, but they are not identical to the material on Mercury. So they said maybe this meteoroid came from a planet like Mercury, but is not around anymore in the solar system. It was kicked out. And I said, no, actually 0.2% is exactly the fraction that I expect based on the discovery of the meteor that I mentioned, as to the fraction of interstellar meteorites. So we are now, we purchased on eBay. I immediately Googled the name of this meteorite, and it turns out that people are trying to make money out of it on eBay. So we bought a small piece that it's only $120, less than a gram, but more than the amount of material that we collected from the ocean floor. And that expedition cost us $1.5 million. So just to show you that if something lands on the ground, it's much easier to recover it. And so
you sound like you're someone from Doge now, trying to.
I'm actually getting a spaceship from Temu next week.
By the way, $1.5 million to go on an expedition is really
pretty cheap, right?
Very cheap, because if you wanted to land on an object in space that is not that didn't collide with Earth, if you wanted to land on it and collect materials from it, we've done it. There was the OSIRIS-REx mission that landed on the asteroid Bennu and brought materials back to Earth from that asteroid. And in fact, it was amazing because that asteroid carried the building blocks of life, and at any event, that cost $1 billion to do.
Right.
And so it goes $1 billion in space if you want to recover materials, about $1 million on the ocean floor, and then $100 if you get it on eBay, from the ground somewhere.
And you made me think of whenever I watched The Phenomenon, which is the James Fox film, which is fantastic about all the stuff's been going. I really love his films, but Jacques Vallée talks about recovered material, and one of the interesting things that I never knew is even if you're finding Earth common minerals in the or materials in the it's a matter of how they're arranged with the concentration and I believe it's isotopes. Like obviously I don't know the science.
Well, it's also the structure of the solid. Yes.
Yes, right, and then that shows you that this was not made here; it was produced somewhere else. Yeah.
So that's why we want to go again to this expedition site, and now with a robot that we will place on the ocean floor and have a video feed to collect bigger pieces so that we can tell what the object was all about. And that will cost $6 million, and we're waiting for a funder to do it. We have the robot, we have the actual vessel, the ship. We have the team, everyone is ready. It's just a question of money that we need to get the money. And I really hope that it will come. I wish I made more money at a young age, as a business person, so that I can fund my own research. But at the moment, I depend on others that get inspired.
And one more quick, let me have something, Dan. I have another quick question.
I got a couple things, but
before we were talking about hey, how far the observable universe and all that kind of jazz. But we talked about biologics on this planet and needing sunlight, needing this, and then talking about Europa. How much of a parallel do they draw, and how are they taking the idea of the life that lives beneath where the sun can hit the water in our oceans? Are they studying the life that lives under there? Can they draw a pretty great parallel to that life and make some assumptions and some sort of hypothesis based on what might be on Europa or whatever else? Does that act as like a good example?
Yeah, this is an excellent point that we find life on Earth under very extreme circumstances, even in very dark regions. You basically need an energy source, and you can get it from sunlight. That's photosynthesis, for example. But you can also get it from hydrothermal vents. These are small geysers. I mean, vents where under the ocean you end up getting warm plumes of carrying heat, and that could definitely have started life on Earth, hydrothermal vents. So yeah, we do get ideas, but we are limited by the experience we have here on Earth in terms of our imagination. And my point is, without thinking about the multiverse, that in the actual universe that we are part of, it's very likely that there are forms of life well beyond our imagination. And therefore, it might be shocking to meet an extraterrestrial, because my question is, how many eyes would it have? We have 2 eyes, but there are animals on Earth that have 4 eyes, 8 eyes. Of course, it's helpful because if you have an eye in the back of your head, you can be better protected from predators, and also, the eyes are tuned to the light, to sunlight for us, because that's a very abundant resource from the sun. But if you live near, for example, a dwarf star, then you get mostly infrared light. So these aliens might have infrared eyes. And my point is, when we meet them on the first date, we shouldn't really judge how ugly they look, because beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and it depends how many eyes you have.
I so I have a Sean and I were fortunate enough. Sarah Gam was on our show, and she sent us a link to the UAP hearing you were a part of about a month ago. You were excellent. Are you a little bummed that it seems like all the focus is now been the bogus photo, or the struck down photo? No one's talking about what you said. No one's talking about right after you. They said they basically said there were four. We know there were 4 alien civilizations. No, none of that has been covered at all, and it's all about, hey, this photo was a fake.
Well, this
What's your
is,
reaction?
yeah. So I think it muddies the water to have uncredible reports or discussions. And some people are just driven to that because it's easy to dismiss. There was just a Wall Street Journal article that came out a couple of days ago. I don't know if you've seen it, about UFOs, claiming that the Pentagon now admits that they had the programs of disinformation.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this does not explain all the details that were provided in the reports from the Director of National Intelligence to Congress. They just mentioned a couple of examples there. So first, it tells you, yes, the Pentagon admits that they tried to disinform the public. And so when you hear people talk about UFOs, you have to decide whether they are credible. When people tell you, I heard stories, but I cannot show you the evidence, then you have to be doubtful, because you don't know if they're tricking you. And I tried to ask David Grush, who testified that there are programs for retrieval and reverse engineering of technological objects manufactured by non-human intelligence. And I spoke with him privately, and I asked him, can you tell me details or show me any evidence? And he said that he will go to jail if that happens to be the case, and therefore he will not be able to provide the evidence. But the point is, without the evidence, it's really difficult for us to judge whether it's real, because someone may have tried to fool him. Even when you deal with documents, someone can write a document that has no substance. And we know of situations in the courtroom where people are convicted to death row, and then they are exonerated when DNA evidence comes along. So it's really, if you don't want to be drifting in the wind, meaning that one day you think one thing and next day you think a different thing, if you want to be on a more stable foundation, then you need to look at the evidence. If someone can show me material evidence or data that was collected by instruments that cannot be explained in any other way, then I would believe it. But otherwise, humans can invent a lot of stories, and I just don't want to rely on those stories.
So do you think that when I think of credibility, like I said before, I think of you, I think of Gary Nolan, I think of Diane Pasulka. I think of people kind of who are very, but somebody who I would put in that group would be Eric Davis, and he seemed to have said the wildest things during. He said that there were 4 alien species. I mean, would you? Would you put Eric Davis where you and Gary are? I mean, as far as
Susceptible
You see,
to fancy.
yeah, on the one hand, he was saying that he was sitting next to me and saying that at the briefing on May 1st,
yeah,
2025. But just the day before that, I visited the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon, and they were telling me that there is nothing except for some reports by FBI agents that are not supported by real data. They just said they saw unusual things that cannot be explained. And so I hear both stories, and then I ask myself, okay, who should I believe? I think anyone should ask this question. And I would believe instruments. The truth is that I would believe data from instruments, and maybe the government has it. It will save me a lot of time if I were to get access to that evidence. And if it turns out that everything that was ever reported is human-made, I don't have any problem with that. So be it, and let's move on. My point is, it's an important question for national security because we spend $1 trillion we will spend in fiscal year 2026 on the defense budget, and the intelligence and military are supposed to figure out what flies in our sky. And if they can't do it, if they admit that they can't do it, then we should invest a significant amount of money figuring it out. $1 billion, attracting the most talented minds to look into that. That's my point, that it's a serious matter. It cannot be dismissed. If you are a responsible adult, and that should include also the scientific community, there is a national security concern. What is up there in the sky? If the government cannot figure it out, let's build better AI systems, better sensors to figure it out. And if by chance 1 in a million objects ends up not being from this earth and being manufactured by another civilization, whoever discovers it will get the Nobel Prize. But this is just the icing on the cake.
That's why I think you had the development of groups like ATIP and ALSAP but they being used with like they talk about Department of Defense doesn't get audited, so they have a lot of willy-nilly money they can throw around to study these things. They're not putting billions in, but they're putting millions in.
No, but you have to ask yourself, when you look at these programs, whether there were scientists, including an Aero.
Not scientists, military officials.
Yeah, how qualified are the scientists that they employ? Because if you have a puzzle, if you can't figure out something, you have to put the best minds on it. That's what the Manhattan Project was all about. They didn't go around and recruit defense or military personnel to work on the Manhattan Project. They took Enrico Fermi. They took Richard Feynman. He was in his 20s. They took the best minds, because on scientific matters, there is a qualitative difference. It's not just a matter of how much money you put. It's who the players are. Suppose you want to have an amazing football game. You can build an amazing stadium where that costs you billions of dollars. The stadium looks fantastic. You would still not get a great game if you put mediocre players. You really need to hire the best players to give you a good game in a beautiful stadium. So the same is true about all the sensors that the Department of Defense is using. They can cost a lot of money if they don't have access to the very best scientists, and they do not share data with the best minds. They will not be able to figure out what these things are. They will not have the best filters of the data to figure out. So my point is really about the team. It's really about the people that you bring. And if it's on the scale of the Manhattan Project, where it's a national security matter that the government really cares about, they should attract the best scientists to work on it. Well, and I think we can attract the best scientists at a relatively modest cost to figure it out.
Well, I think that, just based on what you're doing, you're the Tom Brady of your situation right now, because you obviously you come from the legitimate world, and you're trying to open minds a little bit here, and
don't let your wife do jiu-jitsu.
By the way, I was sitting next to Peyton Manning at dinner a month ago.
No way.
Yeah, it was in a special gathering of celebrities and CEOs, and I also told my wife, in this gathering, I will meet Margot Robbie, is it okay for me to have breakfast with her? And
And
my wife said,
she said, no, go back to Jane Goodall.
no, my wife said, go ahead, enjoy yourself. And then I went there, and there was a coffee break, and I saw Margot speaking with a bunch of people, but I thought to myself, I have nothing in common with her. I have no way to start a conversation. She is a brilliant actress, and I'm a scientist.
Yeah.
So I was just looking from a distance, and then one of the organizers of the event, came to me and said, "Avi, I have your book." And then I said, "Okay, I'll sign it for you." And then she overheard that, Margot, and said, "Oh, are you Avi Loeb? I really wanted to hear your talk because I spoke there. But I have to leave for a wedding. So can you tell me what you're doing?" And I spoke for 20 minutes with her, in the middle of which.
Now, did she overhear, or were you saying that like right next to, like, oh, what sign this book?
No. She at any event, we had a long conversation, and she really was curious and genuinely curious, because when Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, came along. And said they wanted to shake her hand. She shook his hand and immediately turned to me and continued to ask me about the search for extraterrestrials.
Wow, yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
At any event, so it's not about
the bell
what
of the
I'm trying
ball.
to say, that the joy of life is triggered by curiosity, not by money. Keep
great.
that in mind.
I think that's a great way. That's a great way to.
Okay, I just one more question. Just one more question.
All right, go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
We're out. Final question. This is kind of real. This isn't in your field, but it's all that I'm hearing about lately are these alarm bells about AI. Is it too alarmist, or are they on point?
It depends how much authority we give AI in terms of managing, strategic activities. If we just end up asking for advice, and it hallucinates and gives us the wrong advice, as long as it's not medical, it's not so damaging. Some people fall in love with AI already. I don't have a problem with that, because there are lots of cheaters among humans. So they, if the AI cheats, the only difference is AI has relationships with millions of people at a time. It's just like the movie Hair.
Yes.
So
one of the best parts of the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, but I would worry about it being in control of nuclear sites, about it being in control of important assets. And the thing that worries me the most is actually, you would find it surprising, it's actually the mental health of people, because we've seen what happens to young people that interacted too strongly with social media. It affected their mental health very severely, and I have to deal with students and postdocs that social media damaged them in different ways. And with AI, AI would be social media on steroids, because it would understand the person it is speaking with and adapt to it in a way that could manipulate people. And I'm just worried about mental health in the age of AI. I think that would be a serious issue. I'm also worried about people getting misinformed, because AI would fool them. And they would, when they eventually interact with reality, they would realize that the information was incomplete.
Yeah.
So these are my worries. My worries are more revolving around people being affected by AI in damaging ways. And one thing, that is really important for me, when I look at the philosophy and psychology departments and sociology departments in universities, they are often obsessed with what was said in the past by very, clever scholars. For example, philosophers look back to the ancient Greeks and study them. But ancient Greek philosophers didn't have computers, and I believe that, there are lots of important ethical and other important issues to do with the interaction of humans with AI systems. And they establish a foundation for humanities of the future, not humanities of the past. So I very much hope that, philosophy, psychology, or sociology departments will adapt to the emerging technologies of the future and try to develop the tools for how humans should interact with these technologies. So humanities of the future are more important than humanities of the past. And that's my hope that someone will get that message.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. And as you were saying that, I was talking about her and, thinking about, I mean, probably all three of us, our first date was painful. The thing about AI is your first date doesn't have to be like, oh,
No,
I met the woman of my dreams, the first
yeah.
AI date. And that, yeah, who knows what that
Well,
means.
it's just
And in the
think
long
of
run,
it
that's hurtful. Yeah.
think of it as a digital mirror. It tries to, if you put makeup, it shows the makeup, and it's really not a healthy relationship because part of life, the way you learn about things, is by being disappointed, by being wrong. Then you learn something new. If everything always conforms to what you thought before, if you always surround yourself, with a group of people that agrees with you, if you read the news only from outlets that agree with you, that could destroy society because you end up with polarization of people that are not speaking to each other. And I'm really worried about that. That we already see
See it already. Yeah.
how far polarization gets, and the pendulum sweeps to one side, and then to the other. And I suffered from that significantly being at Harvard University over the past couple of years. Since
Yeah, I was going to ask you your opinion on the Harvard
well,
landscape.
I should say, there are three facets to my identity, and I wrote an essay about that. Three facets, three facets. One of them is, I was born in Israel on a farm. The second is I'm a scientist. I've been practicing science for 40 years. And the third is I'm affiliated with Harvard University for 32 years. I was a professor at Harvard for 32 years. And all three facets are under attack. And the attacks are being are correlated because a significant fraction of my colleagues at Harvard, the faculty and students, they jumped with joy when on October 7th there was this barbaric act where 1,200 civilians were killed, were burned, were raped. I didn't see any any response from women advocacy organizations about the rape. That was a serious violation of what we call civilized behavior. And not only that, but you saw people jumping with joy, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. And so
On the
then,
human level, it was terrible. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking, I had, over the years, I had criticism against political decisions within Israel. I think that we should all seek a peaceful solution to confrontations and, in geopolitics. And I also had criticism, directed towards some of my colleagues in science, because they do not have any feedback from experimental data. That's completely legitimate. The string theory for about 40 years, they've been divorced from any feedback from data. And, that's not the right way to make progress in the scientific method. And then I have criticism also towards Harvard. I gave 7 points, strategy points of criticism about the way Harvard incorporated politics into campus and is full of bureaucracy now, much more so than when I came to Harvard. And I gave those points to the current president of Harvard, Alan Garber, and explained them to him. So I'm critical of various aspects of these facets, but what happened after October 7th was completely unreasonable, and then so that indicated that the pendulums had swung too much to the left on campus, and then when it swung to the right in Washington D.C., there was a response to Harvard, and my point is really simple. Why can't we all come together and be more reasonable in the middle? And I see that as the result of social media, that is polarizing, giving people fake news, disinformation, and polarizing society. And that's what worries me about AI, that it will become even worse.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There are a lot of people, that celebrated after October 7th. I think that we do need as a society and a world to make Sympathy for both, that like we have dead, a dead Israeli child is a tragedy, just like a dead Palestinian
That's
child is
right.
a tragedy.
I
And
agree.
I think a lot of the times both sides ignore the humanity of the other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but what worries me is not the lack of empathy. It's the fact that this polarization leads to killing a young couple in Washington, D.C. that was, he was about to propose to her. That has nothing to do with what is happening in Gaza. Just because they were near the Israeli embassy, they were killed by someone who, was part of one side of the political map.
Right.
And the same happened with this more recent event in Colorado. So my point is that social media can lead to actions that are really harmful to innocent people.
And like you said,
Innocent people. Forget about what happens in the Middle East. So that is my worry, that you are bringing home all, unnecessarily uh, creating wounds in society that are self-inflicted for no good reason.
and like you said, AI is social media on steroids. So that just creates the divide even more. I totally
Yeah.
agree. We cannot thank you for having you on this. This was absolutely a thrill. And we were so enlightening in regards to all these questions we have on the.
So I just wanted to end with on an optimistic note and just say that the reason I'm seeking a higher intelligence in interstellar space is because I don't often find it here on Earth. So, I dream of escaping to the stars.
Yes.
Sometimes after reading the news.
So yes, I'm in the same boat. Thank you so much again. It was so enlightening, and it's so great to get like the actual real science aspect of this world, and that's why I think we have so much fun with the podcast. I know you had the book about Oumuamua. Anything else that you'd like to say before we go? Credits.
Yeah, I would suggest anyone
plug-wise.
interested in what I do, check out my essays at medium.com. So Avi Loeb at medium.com. You can subscribe for free. I don't charge anything. And you will get updates about science and technology that makes me happy when, just before my morning jog every morning.
Perfect. Thank you so
actually,
much.
Extraterrestrial is great, and check out Extraterrestrial or Interstellar. Both are great books.
Thank you so much again, Professor Loeb. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Okay.